Was India's Gupta era really a golden age? The full story, not just the shiny parts. You have probably read about the Gupta Empire in your textbook. It talks about great poets, amazing scientists, and beautiful temples. Your teacher might have called it India's golden age. But here is a question nobody asks in class: golden for whom? This essay is going to tell you the full story, the brilliant parts, the dark parts, and the reason why the Golden Age label was invented in the first place. By the end, you will think about history very differently. If you are interested what happened during India's past, smash the like and subscribe buttons to help us to beat the algorithms. Chapter 1. The real achievements were real. Let's start with what was actually brilliant. First things first, the Gupta Empire, around 320 to 550 CE, genuinely produced some of the greatest minds in Indian history. This is not an exaggeration. Let's look at what they actually achieved. The achievement and why it still matters today. Aryabhata calculated that the Earth spins on its axis. Without this, we could not have satellites or GPS today. Indian mathematicians invented the decimal system, 0 to 9. Every smartphone, every calculator uses this Indian invention. Doctors performed surgeries centuries before Europe could. Techniques described in Sushruta Samhita are still studied in medical schools. Kalidasa wrote poetry so beautiful it still moves people to tears. His works are still performed in theaters and read in universities worldwide. The Ajanta cave paintings still exist after 1,600 years. They are a UNESCO World Heritage Site and national treasure. Think of it this way: the Gupta Empire's scientists were like ISRO scientists of their time, working on problems nobody else in the world had even thought of yet. That genius was real. So yes, the achievements were extraordinary. But here is where the story gets complicated. Chapter 2. The Big Fight: British versus Indian Scholars. How the Golden Age label was actually born. To understand why we call it a golden age, you need to understand a fight that happened about 150 years ago, not in a battlefield, but in history books. The British insult. When the British were ruling India, their scholars and officials had a favorite argument. They would say, more or less, India has never been great on its own. You have always been conquered by outsiders. You have no real history. You need us to rule you. This was not just rude, it was the entire excuse for the British Empire. If Indians could not govern themselves historically, then the British were doing India a favor by being here. Imagine if someone told you, you have never done anything important on your own. You need me to help you do everything. You would be furious and you would want to prove them wrong immediately. Indian scholars fight back. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Indian historians and freedom fighters were furious. They started digging through ancient records and found the Gupta Empire with its coins, its poetry, its science, its art. They said, you want proof India was great? Here. Look at this. Aryabhata, Kalidasa, the Ajanta caves, decimal mathematics. How dare you say we have no history? It was a powerful argument. And they were right that these achievements were real and deserved respect. But in their anger and urgency, they did something that historians do sometimes: they told only half the story. The Golden Age label was not invented by a time traveler who visited the Gupta period. It was invented by Indian scholars in the 1800s who were fighting the British Empire. It was a political weapon and a necessary one, but a weapon nonetheless. Here is what they highlighted and what they quietly left out. What they highlighted: Kalidasa's brilliant poetry, Aryabhata's mathematics, beautiful temple architecture, gold coins and trade, Faxian's praise of hospitals and clean cities. What they left out: Faxian also saw untouchables ringing bells to warn people of their presence. The decimal system did not help the peasant who could not read. The temples were built by ordinary workers who remained poor. The gold coin slowly became less pure as the empire ran out of money. Faxian said nothing about the widows, the landless farmers, or bonded laborers. Chapter 3, Meet the People the Golden Age forgot. The majority of Indians who never touched the gold. Devi, the farmer's daughter. Let us meet someone the textbooks never name. Her name is Devi. She is a farmer's daughter living during the Gupta Empire's supposed peak. She has never seen a gold coin. She has never heard of Kalidasa. What she knows is this: her family's land was taken away and given to a Brahmin landlord by the emperor's order. The landlord now collects rent. On top of that, the king's tax collectors arrive twice a year for their share. If the monsoon is weak, and it has been weak for 2 years, there is simply not enough grain left after paying everyone to feed her family of 6. Her eldest brother was taken away to fight in a war happening in a place she has never seen, for a king whose name she cannot pronounce. The historians who studied this period later noted what they called the feudalization of the agrarian economy. In plain language, landlords got more and more powerful, and ordinary farmers slowly lost control of their land and their freedom. Devi is not a footnote in history. Devi is the history. The coin test: a simple way to understand the economy. Here is a simple way to understand what was happening to the Gupta Empire's economy over time. Imagine 2 coins. Early Gupta gold coin, 4th century. Made of nearly pure gold. Heavy and valuable. Accepted everywhere in trade. Shows a confident, powerful empire. Worth its actual weight. Later Gupta coin, 6th century. Mixed with silver, copper, and other metals. Lighter, less valuable. Traders started refusing or discounting them. Shows an empire that is running out of money. Worth much less than it appears. This is exactly what happened to the Gupta economy. Just like a government today that keeps printing money when it is out of cash, the Gupta rulers started putting less and less real gold into their coins. This is called debasing the currency. Why? Because they had too many enemies to fight, too many landlords to keep happy, and not enough real wealth flowing into the treasury from trade and agriculture. Think of it like this: if your school canteen started selling lunch that was 90% chapati and 10% sabzi instead of the usual ratio and still charged the full price, you would notice something was wrong. That is what the debased coins told economists centuries later. Priya, the young widow. There is another person the Golden Age story forgets: women. The Gupta period is often praised for its sophisticated legal tradition and its revival of Dharma. But this same period saw the hardening of rules that made life very difficult for women, especially widows. The practice of a widow following her husband into the funeral fire, which had been rare or local, began to be encouraged and even celebrated during this time. Legal texts began to describe it as the highest virtue a woman could display. A Chinese traveler named Faxian visited India during the Gupta period and wrote detailed notes about what he saw. He praised the free hospitals. He praised the well-paved roads. He praised the orderly cities. He wrote nothing about the widows. The best hospitals in the world do not cancel out the burning of women. A golden age for whom? Chapter 4, The Villains of the Story. Who made life hard for ordinary people? Villain number 1, the landlord system. One of the biggest changes during the Gupta period was how land worked. Earlier, the king owned most of the land, and farmers had some protections. During the Gupta era, the kings gave away massive plots of land to priests and local lords as gifts or rewards. These landlords, called Samanta lords, now had enormous power over everyone who lived and farmed on their land. They collected their own taxes, kept their own armies, and owed loyalty to the emperor mostly on paper. What did this mean for ordinary farmers? It meant there was now one more powerful person between them and the king, a local landlord who could demand whatever he wanted. Imagine your neighborhood was suddenly given to one powerful person, and you had to pay them rent to live in your own home on top of paying your regular taxes. That is roughly what happened to Indian farmers during this period. Villain number 2, the caste rules that got stricter. The Gupta period is often described as a Hindu renaissance, of flowering of Hindu culture and tradition. That part is true. But some of what flowered was not beautiful. Caste rules became stricter during this period. Groups of people who did the most difficult physical work, cleaning, tanning leather, handling the dead, were increasingly pushed to the fringes of society. They were not allowed to use the same wells, walk on the same streets, or eat in the same places as others. In fact, they were required to ring a small bell as they walked through cities, to warn higher caste people that they were approaching. This was not a small thing. This was daily humiliation, written into law. Kalidasa, the great poet, lived in a city where this happened every day. He wrote some of the most beautiful verses in human history. He said nothing about the bell. Villain number 3, the weak later kings. One of the biggest reasons the Gupta Empire collapsed was simple. After the great early kings, Chandragupta I, Samudragupta, Chandragupta II, the later rulers were much weaker. Central armies became weaker because the kings relied too much on the Samanta lords, who had their own armies instead of building a strong central force. When enemies like the Huna invaders came pouring through the mountain passes in the north, the empire had no unified military force strong enough to stop them. One general who fought these battles for decades wrote letters to the capital explaining that the soldiers had not been paid for months, that the feudal lords were keeping the best fighters for themselves, and that the empire would fall if things did not change. His letters were acknowledged. Nothing changed. The Hunas came anyway. A brilliant civilization and a failing government can exist at the same time. The Ajunta frescoes were being painted while the empire's treasury was going bankrupt. Both things were true simultaneously. Chapter 5, The Myth Gets Built. How later historians saw only what they wanted to see. The Golden Age story was not just incomplete, it was also built with a very specific agenda. Let us look at what the nationalist historians of the 1800s and early 1900s chose to emphasize, and why. The Hindu Renaissance problem. The nationalist version of Gupta history told a very neat story. India was invaded and dominated by foreigners, Kushans, Shakas. Then the Gupta kings arrived and restored a glorious Hindu civilization. Then Islamic rulers came and destroyed it. This is a satisfying story. It is also quite inaccurate. The Gupta Empire itself had been deeply influenced by the foreign cultures it supposedly replaced. Their coins showed Greek-style imagery. Their art absorbed Buddhist and Central Asian styles. Their very rise to power was intertwined with those earlier cultural exchanges. The Gupta kings were also not simply champions of one religion. They respected Buddhism and Jainism alongside Hinduism. The Ajanta caves, that great symbol of Gupta-era art, are Buddhist caves. Calling the Gupta period a purely Hindu golden age is like saying a magnificent biryani is a purely one-ingredient dish. The greatness came from the combination, not from keeping everything separate. The communal danger of the Golden Age myth. Here is why this matters beyond history class. When you frame one period as a Hindu Golden Age, you are automatically suggesting that the period that came after the medieval era with its sultanates and Mughals was a fall, a betrayal, a degradation. This framing has real consequences. It has been used for more than a century to create hostility between Hindu and Muslim communities in India. If the Golden Era was Hindu, then the next era was necessarily an enemy era. Historian Kesvan V. Luthat put it simply: once you strip away the myth of the Gupta Golden Age, you also strip away the idea that there was a great Hindu peak followed by a great Muslim destruction. History becomes more complicated and more honest. A history that makes one community look like eternal victims and another community look like eternal destroyers is not history. It is a weapon. And it is built on myths. Chapter 6: The Honest Verdict. What the Gupta Empire actually was. So what should we conclude? Here is the honest, complete picture. What was genuinely golden? Mathematics and astronomy world-leading. Literature and poetry extraordinary. Painting and sculpture transcendent. Medical science centuries ahead of its time. Philosophy and scholarship sophisticated and deep. What was definitely not golden? The lives of ordinary farmers increasingly hard. The position of women deteriorating. The treatment of lower caste people brutal. The economy by the later Gupta period collapsing. The political and military strength crumbling. The truth is, the Gupta period was a classical age. It produced real genius that deserves real respect and real pride. India does not need to exaggerate its history to have a great history. But it was not a golden age for the majority of the people who lived through it. It was golden for the court, for the temple, for the coin. It was not golden for Devi in her field, for Priya at the pyre, for the man ringing his bell through the city's streets. Every age has both. Every age has both the poet writing luminous verse and the farmer going hungry in the field outside the poet's window. A complete history must contain both. The final lesson. What history actually teaches us. History is not just a list of kings and battles. History is a question: who benefited? Who suffered? Who was left out of the story? The next time you read about any golden age, whether in India, China, Greece, or Rome, ask yourself these 4 questions. The 4 questions to ask about any golden age. 1. Golden for whom? Which groups of people actually had better lives? 2. Who is telling this story and why? What was their agenda? What were they trying to prove? 3. What happened to ordinary people during this period? Farmers, women, workers, not just kings and poets. 4. Who benefits from us believing this was perfect? Is someone using this history to justify something today? The Gupta Empire gave India Aryabhata, Kalidasa, and the Ajanta caves. That is a gift across 15 centuries and it deserves honor. But the soil that Devi farmed fed the empire. The workers who carved the caves never saw their names written anywhere. The general who held the border passes while writing unanswered letters, he is part of the story too. Complete history is not less proud. It is more honest. And a nation that is honest about its past is stronger, not weaker. The gold was real. The achievements were real. The question is not whether India had a great past, it did. The question is whether we are brave enough to include everyone in that story. Based on source material exploring the historiography of the Gupta Empire. Adapted for 7th to 10th grade learners. Thank you for being with us in this journey today.